The photograph should have been easy to catalog. In the spring of 2023, a small county museum in northern England was preparing an exhibition of Victorian leisure. They wanted images of seaside trips, Sunday outings, brass band concerts in the park. Things that would balance out the usual diet of soot-blackened factories and grim studio portraits. A local family had recently donated a box of old photographs from their attic, most of them mounted albumen prints from the 1870s and 1880s. Faded weddings, children on wooden hobby horses, a dog with an absurd ribbon round its neck. Archivist Alice Warren sat at her desk, feeding them one by one into the scanner, making notes for the catalog. She slipped the next print from its paper sleeve and paused. It was an outdoor scene. A picnic. 7 people sat and stood on a tartan rug spread over short grass, backing onto a low dry stone wall and a scrubby hillside beyond. 2 older figures in the center, a man with mutton chop whiskers and a woman in a dark dress and bonnet, were bracketed by younger ones. A girl of maybe 16 leaned against the woman's shoulder. A boy in his late teens lounged on one elbow at the front, hat tipped back, hair a little too long for strict respectability. Another boy, perhaps 12, held a wicker hamper open as if presenting its contents. A woman in her 20s in a lighter dress sat with a book in her lap. On the far right, a younger woman with a parasol tilted above her shoulder half smiled at the camera. Plates, cups, and a round cake were positioned carefully on the rug. The atmosphere was relaxed in that restrained Victorian way. No one was laughing, but several had the ghost of amusement at the corners of their mouths. It was, Alice thought, exactly the kind of image the exhibition needed. Proof that people in 1877 sometimes just went outdoors and enjoyed a fine day. She scanned the print and watched it appear crisp on her monitor. As she did with every image, she flipped the card over to see if there was anything useful on the back beyond the photographer's imprint. On the reverse, in pale, spidery ink, was a single line. Harrowdale Picnic, taken the day before they were lost. March 1877. She read it twice. The day before they were lost. At first she assumed it was one of those family phrases that meant something only to the people who wrote it. Lost how? Lost to emigration? Lost in a flood? She might have set it aside as a curiosity if not for the fact that the studio stamp on the front read, J. Collier, photographer, Ashford. Ashford had been her patch for 10 years. If there had been some incident of people being lost on the moor above town in the 1870s, she thought she would have at least heard of it. She slid the print back under the scanner lid and zoomed in on the faces on her screen. 7 people. 2 older adults, 5 younger. All apparently healthy. All apparently at ease. No hint that the writer on the back believed that, within a day of that shutter snapping, none of them would be where they were supposed to be. She looked more closely at the background. The wall. The hillside. The scrub trees. Toward the left edge of the frame, just where the stones dipped and a tangle of gorse began, there was a darker patch she had brushed off at first as a flaw in the print. Zoomed in, it resolved itself into the shape of a man, hat pulled low, coat hanging a little too large from narrow shoulders. He was standing just beyond the wall, half turned toward the group on the rug, half turned away, as if he had been passing by and paused when the photograph was taken. He was too far back to make out a face, but he was there. 7 picnickers. 1 shadowed stranger. Taken, the day before they were lost. The exhibition could wait. Alice opened the county's digital newspaper archive and typed, Harrowdale Picnic Lost March 1877 into the search bar. One headline leapt out at her from the brittle image of the Ashford Chronicle dated March 24, 1877. Mysterious disappearance of a family party on Harrow Moor. The article beneath named them. Mr. and Mrs. Samuel Harper, of 19 Brewery Lane. Their daughter, Miss Agnes Harper, age 22. Their younger children, George, 17, and Ellen, 14. Miss Clara Pike, of the same address, described as niece to Mrs. Harper. And Mr. Robert Pike, Clara's older brother, age 20. 7 people who had, according to the paper, gone up to Harrow Moor on Thursday the 15th for a day's outing and, by Friday morning, had vanished so completely that weeks of searching by police and volunteers had failed to produce a body, a scrap of clothing, or a concrete clue. The picnic site, the report said, had been found abandoned. Rug, hamper, plates, the remains of a meal. No signs of a struggle. Footprints leading away across the heather in several directions, confused by later trampling. No sign of anyone returning to town. Local feeling is much excited, the column concluded, and various rumors are afloat, but at present the mystery remains unsolved. Alice looked back at the photograph. The printed date on the studio mount, March 14, 1877, matched the paper's reference to Thursday the 15th, as the day of the picnic. Victorian provincial papers were often off by a day in their early reports. The note on the back was right. This image had been taken the day before they were lost. Somebody, a relative, perhaps the person who donated the box of photos more than a century later, had known that and wanted it remembered. Now the question was simple. What did lost really mean? The Chronicle carried follow-up pieces over the next month, each more perplexed than the last. Search parties had scoured the moor, the quarry pits, the banks of the Harrow Beck. Farmers on the far side of the ridge had been questioned. There were no reports of strangers with wagons, no signs of robbery at the Harper's house. The family's savings, modest but real, were untouched. Passports and tickets such as they were in 1877 were not in use. People left towns, but they usually left some trail. Lost in this context meant vanished. The phrase, as if the earth had swallowed them, appeared inevitably. For Alice, trained to see history as layers of paper, that kind of language was unsatisfying. The earth did not swallow people. People did things for reasons. They made choices, or choices were made for them. The photograph on her desk was proof that they had existed. The archive would have to hold proof of what happened next. She began with the photographer. The back of the card gave the address. J. Collier, portrait and landscape photographer, 12 High Street, Ashford. The museum held, in a separate accession, Collier's studio daybooks, leather-bound volumes where he recorded appointments and payments. Turning to the entries for March 1877, she found the one she wanted. March 14th. Mr. Harper, outdoor group at Harrowdale, family party, 7 adults. 3 plates. 1 finished and delivered. 5/paid. There was a faint pencil notation in the margin beside it, added later. All missing. Police took 1 copy. So the police had had a copy from the start. It made sense. In cases of disappearance, any recent likeness was invaluable. Wordless faces printed on cards could be shown in other towns, at coach stations, at port offices. There was a good chance that the plate Emma had scanned was the studio spare. Another identical one might still sit, forgotten, in some police file. The county record office shared a building with the museum. After lunch, Alice went downstairs and requested the 1877 coroner's inquest book and any surviving police reports related to the Harrow Moor disappearance. The coronial register contained only a brief note. Persons missing, inquest adjourned, signed die. No bodies, no inquest. Without a corpse, the law could do little more than wring its hands. The police files were different. The chief constable of the time, a methodical man named Inspector Clegg, had kept a detailed diary of the search. March 16th, he recorded, was when they first realized there was a problem. A neighbor, Mrs. Telford, had knocked at the Harper's door at 8 in the morning to borrow sugar. No one answered. That was not unusual in itself. But she knew, as everyone in that close-packed part of town knew, that the Harpers had planned a picnic on the moor the previous day and had spoken of being back by nightfall. By noon, when no one had seen them and the Harpers' cart still stood in its usual place by the side gate, Mrs. Telford grew uneasy. She tried the door. It was locked. Looking through the front window, she could see the parlor as usual, hearth cold. She went to fetch the police. Clegg's men broke the back door and made a rapid inspection. The house was in ordinary order. The beds had been slept in the night before, then made. The kitchen was tidy. There were no signs of struggle, no hastily snatched clothing, no letters of farewell. The Harpers and their relations had simply not come home. Reasoning that if anything had happened, it must have been on the moor, Clegg led a party of constables and neighbors up the steep lane that led out of town onto Harrowdale. They found the picnic site within an hour. It lay in a shallow hollow near a clump of rowan trees, partly sheltered from the wind. The hamlet's children had used it for games for years. Some of the constables recognized it. The rug was there, slightly rucked as if people had risen in haste. The hamper lay open. Plates, a bread knife, the remains of bread and cold meat were scattered. The cake, or what remained of it, had rolled onto the grass, its side dented, flies already exploring the exposed crumb. There was no sign of blankets, shawls, or walking sticks. No bottles beyond a single stoneware jug of ginger beer lying on its side. No human beings. Footprints marked the softer patches of earth, but so many people had been up and down that slope in recent days that it was hard to tell which were old and which were new. A couple of the searchers thought they saw a line of prints leading toward the old quarry, others insisted they continued along the beck toward the sheepfolds. Within a few days, hundreds of boots had made the whole area a blur of overlapping ovals. One line in Clegg's diary caught Alice's attention. Found near wall at north end of hollow. Impression as of another person having stood somewhat apart from the party. possible shepherd or passerby. No one in town admits to having seen them that day. In 1877, with limited forensic tools, there was little more he could do with that observation than noted. Now, combined with the faint shape at the edge of the photograph, it suggested something else. The stranger in the background of the picture and the impression as of another person in the grass might be the same. Clegg noted that he had shown the studio photograph, a cabinet card, likeness of the family party on the moor, to people in surrounding farms and villages. No one, he wrote, had recognized the faces as being seen on the roads that night or in the days after. His last entry on the case, dated April 10, 1877, was blunt. Search continues but with diminishing hope. Opinion settled among many that the Harpers and Pikes must somehow have walked into danger on the moor, old shaft, soft ground, or the beck and flood, and that Providence alone knows where they lie. Without bodies we cannot proceed further. The file closed there. Alice sat back from the table. 7 people did not just walk into danger, in such a way that not even a scrap of clothing floated to the surface or snagged on a rock. If they had fallen into one of the old mine shafts, bodies might never be found, but there would still be some sign. Disturbed soil, a broken fence, evidence of a collapse. Clegg himself had not been satisfied, but his tools and manpower had reached their limit. She turned to other records. Parish registers confirmed the Harpers' existence. Samuel and Margaret's marriage in 1854. Children baptized, Agnes, George, Ellen. The Pike siblings recorded lodging with them after their parents' deaths. All neat, all mundane. There were no burial entries for any of them in 1877. On an impulse, she checked outgoing passenger lists from Liverpool and Hull for the months after the disappearance. Emigration to America and Canada was common. A family that wanted to vanish from gossip and debt could, in theory, stage a disappearance and board a ship under false names. She found one tantalizing near miss. A Samuel Harris party of 7 booked on a steamer from Hull 2 weeks after the Harrows were last seen. But the ages and composition did not quite match, and the surname was common. More likely, she thought, the Harpers really were dead. Which brought her back to the photograph. Who had written the line on the back? Taken the day before they were lost. The ink was faded but not as old as 1877. The hand looked like early 20th century spiky script. Perhaps one of Clara's or Ellen's children, if they had lived. Except, according to the records, they had not. She checked the donor file. The box of family photographs had come from a Mrs. Marion Liversedge, who had died in 2019 aged 92. Her grandson, clearing her house, had given the lot to the museum with a brief note. Old photos from Grandma's side. Think some are Harpers/Pikes. Alice called him. On the phone, he admitted he knew little about that branch of the family. There was some story, he said, about people who went up on the moor and never came back. Gran used to frighten us with it when we were kids. Mind how you go on Harrowdale or you'll end up like the 7, that sort of thing. Did he remember his grandmother writing about the day before they were lost? He thought so. She had a habit of scribbling little captions on the backs when she got old, to help her remember who was who. I wish now I'd paid more attention. There was, however, one more lead. A shoebox of paper his grandmother had kept separate from the photograph albums, filled with letters and recipes and small oddments. He had not yet had the heart to go through it but offered to bring it to the museum. A week later, Alice sifted through the contents of that box. In among the domestic detritus, knitting patterns, a ration book, a postcard from Blackpool, she found, folded small, a much older letter, the paper browned, the ink rusted to near brown. It was dated May 1903 and addressed to "My dear Polly." The signature was "Your cousin Clara." If it was the same Clara, she had survived longer than the record suggested. The letter was mostly family news, children, illnesses, a husband's trouble at work, but one paragraph in the middle made Alice stop. "You asked if we still have the likeness from that day," Clara had written. "Yes, it is in the drawer in the parlor, though I do not look at it often. Mother Harper and Father and poor George and our Ellen and Robert and myself and little Nell, all spread on the rug. Sometimes I think if we had not had Mr. Collier take it, we should have come back safe. But that is foolish talk. It is only that it was the last day when we were all as we were. I have written on the back, so if ever it passes out of my hands they will know. The day before we were lost. For in a way, Polly, even though I came down from the moor again, a part of me never found its way home." Alice read the paragraph again, feeling each detail click into place. Clara had not vanished with the rest. She had survived whatever had happened on Harrow Moor. Yet there was no record of her testimony in the constable's file, no statement in the chronicle. As far as the public documents were concerned, All 7 Harpers and Pikes had disappeared without witnesses. So where had Clara been? She went back to the police diary with new eyes. There, on March 17th, a brief line she had skimmed over before now jumped out. Informed that Miss C. Pike found in semi-delirious state at cottage of Mrs. R., outskirts of town. Claims to have come from Moor. Dr. Jenkins attending. To be questioned when mind clearer. There was no follow-up entry. Dr. Jenkins's casebook, preserved separately in the medical archive, filled in some of the gaps. He had been called to see a young woman at the home of a Mrs. Radcliffe, a widow who occasionally took in sewing and lodgers. The girl had staggered to her door at dawn on the 16th, soaked to the skin, shoes lost, hands scratched by brambles. She gave her name as Clara Pike and said she had been up on Harrow Moor on a picnic. Beyond that, she spoke only in fragments. She talked of fog coming down too fast for summer, of a quarrel between Samuel and Robert over something she would not specify, of someone else's voice heard in the mist who did not belong to them, of running blindly and falling. She did not, at that point, know that the others were missing. Over the next week, Jenkins noted, she drifted in and out of lucidity. When pressed for details about what had happened after the quarrel, she would shake her head violently, begin to cry, or lapse into silence. Whether from professional caution or genuine inability to extract a coherent narrative, Jenkins did not provide the constabulary with a neat timeline. Instead, he wrote, "Patient displays symptoms consistent with shock and exposure. Some indications of hysteria. At present, unable or unwilling to give full account of events on Moor. In interest of health, I have advised Mr. Clegg to suspend questioning." By the time she was well enough to answer, public attention had moved on. Without bodies, without a clear accusation, the machinery of law slowed. No one was eager to push a half-recovered young woman to recount what might be an unhelpful horror. Clara left Ashford soon after. Her later marriage in another town to the clerk Arthur Mills confirmed that she had, outwardly at least, resumed a conventional life. In her letter to Cousin Polly, written a quarter of a century later, she had chosen her words carefully. "Even though I came down from the moor again, a part of me never found its way home." Alice sat for a long time with that sentence. There was one more thing in the letter, squeezed into the margin at the end in smaller handwriting. "Do you remember," Clara asked, "that tramp they caught up by the quarry that week? Some said he had been seen near Harrowdale the day before. I never did like to pass that way after dark." The tramp could easily be linked with the faint figure in the photograph, the stranger by the wall. Police records from April 1877 mentioned a vagrant arrested near the old quarry and charged with stealing chickens. He gave his name as Thomas Shaw, though that might not have been true. He was drunk, belligerent, and carried no identification. Clegg questioned him briefly about the Harrow party. Shaw denied ever seeing them. He said he kept away from Sunday folk, and minded his own business. There was no evidence to hold him on anything beyond petty theft. He served a month in jail and disappeared from the record. To later storytellers, especially children raised on half-remembered gossip, it was tempting to cast him as the lurking killer in the background of the picnic photograph. A stranger in the hills. A shadow at the wall. A man whose very vagueness made him a convenient vessel for fear. To a historian, the lines could not be drawn so cleanly. No confession. No witness. No discovered cache of blood-stained clothing. In the end, the mass vanishing of the Harpers and Pikes resisted neat resolution. Clara's fragmentary memories suggested a gathering mist, raised voices, someone else's presence, panic. Perhaps one or more of the party stumbled into danger, a bog, a shaft, a sudden deep pool, and others followed in a doomed attempt to save them. Perhaps fear magnified poor footing into catastrophe. A quarrel between family men on a lonely moor could turn ugly. A stranger might intervene for good or ill. Human beings, even in tight-knit Victorian communities, could make sudden, irrevocable choices. What the photograph captured was all of them a few hours before any of that happened, before fog or fear or a stranger's shadow bent the road of the day away from safe return. When the museum finally mounted its exhibition, the picnic image took a place in a small side room labeled Unsolved. Beneath the enlarged print, Alice wrote a caption that balanced fact and uncertainty. Family picnic on Harrow Moor, March 1877. Identified as Samuel and Margaret Harper, their children Agnes, George and Ellen, and relatives Clara and Robert Pike. Photograph taken by local studio J. Collier on the afternoon of March 14th. The next day the party went missing on Harrow Moor. Despite extensive searches, no bodies were ever recovered. Only Clara Pike returned with confused memories of fog and panic. The man standing beyond the wall has never been identified. On opening night, visitors lingered in front of the image. Some pointed to the stranger at the edge, arguing in hushed tones about whether he looked ominous or merely curious. Others studied the faces on the rug, trying to guess which girl was Agnes, which young man was Robert, whether Ellen was the one with the book or the one with the parasol. An elderly woman with a walking stick approached the display slowly, leaned in, and then beckoned to a younger man beside her. "That's them," she said softly. "Those are the ones your great-granddad told me about. The Harpers. He used to say never go picnicking on Harrowdale because the moor keeps what it takes." Whether or not moorland keeps anything, the photograph had given back something that might otherwise have faded entirely. 7 individuals with names, clothes, habits, a taste for cake and fresh air, a particular way of sitting on a rug or holding a hamper. For more than a century, the 7 on Harrow Moor had been a cautionary phrase, a line in old newspapers, a ghost story told to frighten children indoors at dusk. Now, visitors could see them as they had been that afternoon, before the path home bent out of sight. A middle-aged man in a worn coat stood a long time before the picture, his shopping bag dangling from one hand. When he finally turned away, he said to no one in particular, "They look so normal. That's the worst of it. Like any of us on a nice day." It is easy, looking back, to focus on the mystery. Who was the stranger by the wall? What really happened in the fog? Did someone lead them into danger, or did fear and mischance do the work alone? Those questions are not trivial. They are the knots that keep stories alive. But the deeper weight of the photograph lies in what it says about how slender the barrier can be between one ordinary afternoon and a headline that begins with "mysterious." The Harpers and the Pikes set out with sandwiches and a cake, a rug, perhaps a book of poetry for Agnes to read aloud, a parasol to keep the March sun off Ellen's face. They did what countless families have done before and since. Sought in a hard world a patch of sky and grass where for a few hours, they could pretend the mill and the narrow lane and the coal smoke did not exist. They asked the photographer to come up, to fix that moment in silver and paper, to make it something they could place on a mantle and show to others. They could not have known that for 140 years strangers would stare at that same fixed moment and think not, "What a pleasant day," but, "That was the last time anyone saw them all together." We look at the 7 figures on the rug and the man in the shadows beyond, and we bring to the image everything that followed. The empty house, the searchers on the moor, the constable's weary ink, the cousins who told spooky stories, the archivist in 2023 leaning in toward a computer screen. They did not have any of that. They had only the feel of the grass under the blanket, the taste of the first slice of cake, the brief discomfort of holding still for the camera while the wind tugged at their hats. The photograph cannot tell us, finally, whether an 8th figure on the hillside meant them harm, or whether the land itself claimed them without malice. It can only offer us the last clear view of who they were before the word "lost" attached itself to their names. In that sense, it is both evidence and elegy. Proof that they existed, and a reminder of how swiftly existence can slip in a single day from being lived to being looked at.